I just wanted to say a few comments before we go into the discussion about MOOCs. I remember a year ago when we were in London at the QAA conference then, I think quite a lot of people weren't that aware of what a MOOC was. I mean, I think the term was maybe known in America, but perhaps lots of us were not that conversant with it. And so we're just going to hear a bit about from very different people. We're going to start with Raja Naik.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jack. Everyone, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to set out just 3 brief thoughts for you, because I want to make sure we've got time for a really interactive discussion. The first is why we're doing this and what characteristics we hope that FutureLearn brings out for you when we launch in the second half of this year. The second is around the QA issues related to online learning and to MOOCs. And the third is something around how I think it's important that we think when we look at this whole subject, because it's still very, very, very new, particularly in our sector. So what happened last year? Put frankly, we were shocked by the speed of the change that we saw, particularly in the United States, last year. We, as you can imagine, were following the evolution of MOOC providers very, very closely. We'd seen a whole range sprite up in the latter part of 2011. This was a march that started with Wikipedia, who brought data, knowledge, information online in 2002 and has evolved since then. But we were really shocked. We were surprised, to be very honest, about the pace of change. And 23 of the top 25 universities in the United States had signed up to a MOOC by summer 2012. In the United Kingdom, that was 1. The university in this city had signed up to Coursera. And so if you think about the fact that we've got the second best higher education system on the planet, an £8 billion export industry, a system that has evolved and nurtured itself over many centuries to create the position that we now hold, it was absolutely critical that we innovated and that we responded to the new ways that students are learning. And so that's why we launched FutureLearn. Now we have 17 wonderful British universities, including many of you in this room. Last week at Going Global, David Willits announced the British Council are coming online as partners. And in Delhi, the Prime Minister 2 weeks ago announced that we've got the British Library as well. You'll see more announcements over the next few weeks, and I hope you're impressed by those. That's why we're doing this. We want to help other institutions in the UK to really innovate and to make sure that we continue to be at the vanguard of global higher education, especially in the new world. Second thoughts on quality assurance. I want us to, and this is something that we've struggled to communicate, I think, recently, but we've got to make sure that we make a very, very clear distinction between MOOC providers, massive open online course providers, and traditional, formal, accredited online learning. FutureLearn is not the same as the Open University. MOOC providers are providing free content. They're not providing a world-class student experience that means that the Open University gets to the top of the NSS every single year. They're not providing the sort of associate lecturers and tutors that people know and love about the OU. So we've got to be very, very clear about that distinction. Now, there might be some blurring of the boundaries, and there might be certification and accreditation that we can come on to talk to, but it's important that we make a clear distinction between the online learning that institutions and individuals are paying for and free content that might inspire people and educate people and supplement the learning of individuals right across the world. Third and final thought is that people have been focused to a great extent recently on the technology, rightly so. What does it look like? What are the analytics? What's the plumbing? What's the pedagogy? How does this look like? What's the feel? And that's fine. But I would suggest to you that the future of online learning and the future of blended learning, flipped classrooms, whatever you want to call it, is not about the technology. It's about the people. And it's about 2 sets of people, crucially. The first set of people is academics and institutions. There is a lot of concern, anxiety, fear in some cases, amongst our academic communities about what this means. Is it a burden? Is it something else on my list? I'm currently doing the job of 17 people. Am I going to be doing the job of 18? All of those concerns are very legitimate. We've got to make sure that we share with people, walk with people, work with people to make sure that they don't regard this as a burden, but an opportunity to really enhance their learning, to develop richer and more personalised relationships with their students. And I think we've got to get that right if this is to be successful. And the second group of people this has got to be about, and it has to be about these people, is our students. Why are we doing this? It has to be student-centred. And I'd give you one example of that. When FutureLearn goes live, in the second half of this year, you're not going to have content and courses on the homepage that are designed and directed by me or by our Vice-Chancellor or by our Chief Executive. You're going to have courses which are up there and profiled by students. The content that is at the front of FutureLearn, that is currently on the front of iTunes University, where we're the most downloaded institution in the world, with 60 million downloads over the last few years, is directed by students. It's content that students have shared, students have rated, students have liked, students have tweeted about. It's students that should drive our platforms and our interventions. And I think if we get that right, we've got a huge opportunity for online learning, as long as we recognise the caveats and the limits, to not only drive through serious advances in terms of quality, not only inspire millions more to look at the UK higher education system as a destination for them, but a phenomenal opportunity to widen access to.
Hello, I'm from BIS. Some of you will have bumped into me before as Director of Higher Education Policy. I moved on from that in November. I'm now leading Vince Cable's educational export strategy, where I met some of you again. And my interest in this is about how online learning, distance learning, TNE in general, contributes to cash flowing into the UK. In this case, it's the higher education sector, although the education strategy is intended to cover all aspects of UK education, schools, FE, and indeed educational providers. Just some reflections on MOOCs, if I may, from a overtly government point of view, not ministerial, but government. Where does BIS come at this? And I speak as someone who is a veteran of the UK university, which some of you will remember, where governments have dabbled rather more directly in trying to intervene in online technology markets about nearly 10 years ago now. First of all, I'd just say that from the BIS and indeed government point of view, we very much welcome what the OU are doing. We very much welcome FutureLearn. We are not subsidising it. It's very, very important that this is not UK-EU. Government has not put any money into FutureLearn. And the reason for that, apart from the fact the OU, as far as I'm aware, hasn't asked us for any, is that this is not an area where it seems to us there is a clear and obvious market failure. Indeed, on the contrary, as far as one can see, there are venture capitalists falling over themselves to identify the, I will call it MOOC phenomenon, and see which aspects of it may work, may not work. As Rajay said, these are venture capitalists who are interested, I think, in the MOOC as the platform, the Coursera which delivers the course, not particularly in the university, which provides the course that sits on the platform. And again, as you'll know, of course, there are people come at this, the venture capitalist or the global visionary, I should say, either from a charitable point of view. Bill and Melinda Gates are backing EDX or EDX, how do we pronounce it? Or from the overtly commercial. And Coursera has made no secret of the fact that it is trying to make a profit. But as far as we can see, there isn't a market failure here, and therefore, while the government is very interested in what FutureLearn is doing, very interested in the MOOC phenomenon, as who would not be, it doesn't feel like a need to something that says government needs to get directly involved. And there's a great awful lot of reasons why government should not, from bearing in mind previous experience. The second thing is that I think anyone would say, not just government, but any person would say, that that anything that increases the reach of education across the world, across different countries, makes it more accessible to more people, is a good thing. It's a unilaterally good thing. We don't have to say that every course on every provider is great. Not all the courses we will find online at the moment from any provider are necessarily great, and no doubt if you search the web you will find some examples of truly bad courses being provided right now by someone somewhere. I don't think it's government's job to sort of root those out. Indeed, that would be ridiculous. And given the choice, I would rather have courses there, reaching people, interesting people, than not there. I think I'd rather have the web used for education than for online porn, if I'm being crude about it. So I think that anything that extends the reach of education and means that some poor school boy or girl in the middle of India can do a Stanford robotics course on their mobile phone, that's fantastic. Where I think government may have a role at some point, certainly as far as the UK is concerned, this is where I suppose one comes into the QAA aspect of it, is that students should know and should be aware of what they are signing on to, and indeed what they're not. I don't think there's any problem whatever with someone clicking onto a course for any reason at all, and indeed most of us, most of the time we click on things on the net, I suspect, do not click on intending to have our learning certificated, even if we go and look at, for example, an educational programme from the BBC and glance at it for half an hour. That's not why we're doing that. If, on the other hand, a student clicks onto something and pays money and they are told that this contributes to a degree which is recognised in the UK, then we do need to have some underpinning to that statement. And I think that is a role for government to consider with the sector, how and what that might mean. And that, I think, is where the QAA interest in all of this comes. But I am not sure that that raises any fundamental questions that are not already raised by online provision by a whole range of institutions of the type Rajesh has already mentioned.
I want to come back on some of those issues about whether MOOCs and university degrees can complement each other, or how much they will come into conflict with each other. But we're going to just hear a little bit about the implications for regulating or oversight of MOOCs and how the QAA can perhaps play a role in that.
Thank you, Jack. Stephen Jackson, Director of Reviews at the Quality Assurance Agency. I think the title of this session is about the challenges and opportunities for quality assurance of MOOCs, and just following on from the points that Martin's been making about where would QAA's focus be in this rapidly expanding area of educational provision. It would be very much, I think, on the awards that students might achieve as a result of studying through this format, and on the whole process of the award of credit. Because there's a clear distinction, as Rajesh mentioned earlier, between this massive revolution in access to higher education, to learning, to opportunities on the internet, and the more formal delivery of programs of study that lead to qualifications. I just wanted to comment on three particular quality issues, as I see them, with regard to the development of MOOCs. First of those is about quality control, about knowing how good the information that's available on the internet is actually going to be. How good is it as far as students are concerned? Are they getting access to quality learning material? I'm not suggesting that the Quality Assurance Agency should take on a role of quality assuring the internet. I think that's one of the nature of this whole world is that anybody can put information up onto the internet and anyone can get access to it. There are, I think, critical questions about the quality control of the information that students are being provided with for the purposes of learning. Where it's coming from a recognized institution on the basis of experience of delivery of programs within that institution, there are clear mechanisms for ensuring that the courses have been properly designed and properly developed and the content is quality assured. That isn't necessarily the case for all material, and there may be, I think, some opportunity or need for some form of quality mark of reputable and quality provision on the internet, which can be used to guide students to the right sorts of materials for their purposes of their interest. Secondly, I think there is an issue around what I've referred to as rules of combination. about how you put that learning together in a comprehensive and logical and structured way to actually gain the benefits of learning. Individual programs within individual institutions are put together in such a way as that there is clear progression of student learning from level 4 to level 5 to level 6, that learning in level 4 becomes a prerequisite for learning in level 5, and so on. The whole thing is done within a framework, within a structure, which manages the student learning process. And there are appropriate checks and balances in those programs which ensure that students make appropriate progress through the system. You haven't necessarily got those frameworks when access to learning is managed in a much more disparate way, and where there's much greater choice from students as to where they will pick their learning from. And I think what we will need is some form of guidance as to what modules should be put together with which other modules in order to make a coherent and valuable learning experience for students. And thirdly, just to pick up on the point that Martin made about our real concern, I think, as an agency, will be on student awards, that our role as an agency is to assure the quality and standards of higher education awards. And there will need, I think, to be clear and well-developed processes in place for assuring particularly arrangements for assessment of individual modules and programs. That for an award to be of value, for the certificate that a student receives as a result of studying via MOOCs, there will need to be a clear underpinning of the way in which the standards have been set and assured as part of that program. And that does come down, I think, to management of assessment. And I know there are various options and opportunities with regard to online assessment and peer assessment, of formal examination and so on, that have been explored in the context of MOOCs. But we, as an agency, will have a particular focus on the institutions that are making the awards and how those institutions can assure the quality and standards of awards which they put their name to.
If anyone's got any questions, it would be great to get everyone involved. But maybe if I can just start with this, Martin, can I just find a bit more about what BIS is doing in terms of marketing MOOCs? I mean, it seems to me that maybe MOOCs are something of a Trojan horse to reach markets like India, which are very quite maybe hostile to normal universities coming there. Is it a way of, you're focusing on international students, and is this the key in terms of generating a cash flow?
I think as I said, we do not ourselves, we have not created any MOOCs and have no intention of creating any MOOCs from the government. We welcome the way the OU is approaching it, and we would welcome other universities who want to get involved. This seems to be a space on which others can play. I think in terms of from the perspective of the American large-scale MOOC provider, do they see this as a way of getting into places they couldn't otherwise get? I think they've discovered that it is. I'm not quite sure if they initially said, yes, of course, we will develop this because out there in the middle of India, there are people who want to go and study theoretical physics and can't. I think that they've discovered, once you put the course online, that actually there are people in the middle of India who are interested in studying theoretical physics. And of course it feels absolutely great if you're a professor at, well, any university, and you suddenly multiplied your audience for your words of wisdom from 100 in a room to 10,000 all over the world. And some of these 10,000 are clearly some of the very, very cleverest people you've ever come into contact with. And all of that must be absolutely fantastic. I'm not sure, though, that anyone from at the outset has seen that as a cash cow. Actually, I think it's been prompted more by universities wanting to reach out because it's part of their mission, and philanthropists wanting to say, this is education, it is good, let's spread it.
Okay, great. Yep, we've got a question here. Could you say who you are? And can we have a microphone as well, please? If we've got any more questions as well, we can take a couple together.
Thanks. Ollie Mackenzie, University of Essex and University Ventures. That's really one for Stephen, or a couple of things for Stephen. Well, firstly, the Section 2B of the old Code of Practice covered some of the areas around here and gave some specific guidance for institutions who are developing distance learning. That's now been lost, and it's now subsumed with kind of being online is just part of all education. Other agencies and other countries have still got kind of various annexes and appendices to their structures which refer directly to online and distance learning. And I wonder if, in the context of what's, something that's happened only the last, 16 months or whatever it is, that the QAA might want to review that position. Is it now the pressure to, a little higher? And the subsidiary one, clearly MOOCs are about unaccredited, or maybe about unaccredited modules or courses, but Coursera and others are producing, are charging now for certificates of completion, and it's possible that certificates of completion may be cashed in at various places, not in this country at the moment, for live credit. So it's perhaps a little bit more blurred, and do you have a view on how to manage that?
On the first point, you're right. We've rewritten the chapter on collaborative provision, and the section that dealt with flexible and distributed learning has not been incorporated into Chapter 10. It's now distributed through other parts of the Quality Code. It's not that we no longer have an interest in flexible methods of delivery. It's just that they're not represented as a separate section or a separate annex, as you suggest. And maybe in the context of MOOCs, that may be an issue we need to revisit. But you may recall that the way in which we'd approached that was to look at the learning experience of students. It's very difficult with distance learning to know what it is you're actually reviewing, because there is no tangible campus or arrangements which can be the subject of a traditional review. And we took the view that we should be looking at how students consume, how they interact with the provision for distance learning. And I think that principle would apply in this context as well. Taking that forward, I think there are issues about what is the nature of the learning experience through distance learning, and what do students get from it. The certificate of completion that is now widely talked about is just that. It's a certificate of completion. I think there are questions about its face value, its credibility as a qualification, and we'll be interested to see how acceptable these certificates are by employers, about what it is understood that the certificate actually represents. It comes back to my earlier point that if there is to be genuine academic credit associated with this form of learning, then there has to be some proper mechanism for assuring the quality and standards of that credit. And that, for me, is one area where I think we haven't yet reached a reasonable understanding about how it can be managed in this particular way.
Rajay, would you like to come in and say, maybe pick up on that point? In terms of how will these courses of completion, will they perhaps begin to eat into the traditional market of, say, the Open University offering distance learning? If a student is coming with a certificate in electronics, saying, I've got this from FutureLearn, it's essentially the Open University, how is that exactly different from, say, a short course that you're offering?
Yeah. Well, firstly, let's make a very clear distinction between FutureLearn, which is a completely independent private company, as we described it when we first talked to Martin and ministers about it, and the OU. So, this is a consortium of not only us, but 16 other great universities and the British Library and the British Council and more to follow. But in terms of the specific question, I mean, firstly, we've got to make sure that when we ask these questions of ourselves, traditionally when we answer these questions, we can think of it in either the English or the UK context. What is the cachet of a certificate, for example? With online learning with MOOCs, our primary audiences are global. And the cachet and the face value of a certificate in some hugely fast-growing economy in South America or Latin America or the Far East is hugely different to the cachet and the face value of that certificate in the United Kingdom. Let me give you one example, English in Action, which is a program that we've had out in Bangladesh for the last 2 or 3 years. We've now trained 900,000 people with their English proficiency. At the end of that, you get a certificate. It's got the OU logo on it, the BBC logo on it. When we go out there, the reaction is incredible. This certificate has massive cachet. amongst employers out there. And if you're a worker there and you've got that certificate, your CV goes to the top of the pile. And so the impact of those sorts of certificates here might not be the same as it is over there. Just another point, just to bear in mind as well when we look at these issues. We've seen, particularly in the US, around quality assurance of what's online, some really concerning sort of issues and challenges. And what we really hope with Future Learner and what we will deliver is a really wonderful, rich experience for our students. So, the British Library, for example, will bring their collections to life. We're working with employers to make sure that what students go through there is transferable into the workplace. And the content that goes on there, we're currently working with the academics in those institutions to make sure that they're engaging, to make sure they're accessible. Something I'd encourage you to all to look at is the Khan Academy in the US. Sal Khan, who's got the most amazing following now of literally tens of millions of people watching his content because it's engaging. The only reason why we've had the success that we have in online learning is because it's had that interactive element to it. And I think we've got to make sure that what we deliver is not like some of the problematic situations we've got where, with some of the providers, you essentially have got a camera in the back of a lecture theatre, and that content then being uploaded. That is not what you would expect from the British higher education system, and that's not what you're going to get from Future Learn. So there are some big questions there for the QAA, and we've already had some great conversations with Anthony, who I think has demonstrated real leadership on this issue. But we've got to make sure that across all of this, we put front and centre, as I said at the outset, the students. If we do that, we're not going to go too far wrong.
Okay, have we got any more questions from the floor? Just over there.
Reagan Hiles and Moshi, the National Student Services Organisation. Putting to one side for the moment that MOOCs aren't subject to quality assurance, if we were to subject them to quality assurance, and then thinking about the QAA code and recent chapters, how on earth would you do things like consider the student engagement in developing MOOCs? How would you consider things like student support for MOOCs?
Stephen?
The title of this presentation is about challenges. And I recognise that the code of practice is written very much from the point of view of student learning experience on campus, in traditional institutions. And this is opening up the opportunity for learning in a very different way and with very different sets of experiences. I don't think it's impossible to adapt what we do to meet these circumstances. But I think it would be inappropriate to suggest that what we consider currently as an appropriate learning experience for students to be easily transferable to alternative methods of learning. And what we would need to do, I think, is to ensure that how students engage with these learning opportunities is actually properly managed by those who are making the awards and giving the credit at the end of the process. It's a bit like the issue about flexible and distributed learning. All you can look at, I think, is the learning experience of the students and whether that learning experience is sufficient and appropriate to allow them to achieve the learning outcomes, the objectives of the programs that they're studying. And you have to look at it in context.
More questions? Maybe you'd like to...
I can certainly answer the QA question. Let me just throw a few more sort of thoughts to you as well around this. So one of the huge drivers around this for us to all think about, and I think Martin's point earlier about motivations here is very, very important. So there absolutely is a mission central thing here about access and how you really open up the system. But frankly, there is also a strong business case here too. And so when you look at the fact that there is literally billions of pounds that is about to be invested into new private providers, as we've talked about this morning, and new online ventures, when you combine that with what we've seen across our industry and our economies over recent years with companies who are well established, Woolworths, HMV, others like that, who haven't responded to the digital revolution with quite the speed that they need to. Blockbuster is a great example where Netflix have basically eroded their whole market almost overnight. And when you look at that in the context of the money that's coming in, the online revolution, but also the fact that demand, particularly in the fastest growing markets around the world, cannot be satisfied by conventional supply, you've got an incredible perfect storm. And when those three things come together, you start to see the sort of implications and the sort of things going on right now. And certainly what our partners have told us, not all of them, but certainly a message that's come across very clearly to us, is that for them, this is a huge global megaphone to attract literally hundreds of thousands and millions of students right across the world. And the progression routes through that are really interesting. I'd give you two proxies just to finish this point on. The first is Coursera. Coursera are currently operating at a conversion rate of around 7% from informal to formal, bringing those students through to their partner institutions. We've got a similar model, but very, very different. So our best proxy at the OU is our most successful BBC co-production, Frozen Planet. Who watched one episode of Frozen Planet in the UK last year? Put your hand up. Fantastic. So my analysis says that's about 44%. 44% of all viewing adults in the UK watched at least one episode of Frozen Planet, 11 million people a week. Of those, we had 300,000 ordering the poster before we had a concern for the Amazon and stopped shipping them. We then had tens of thousands download the ebook in the interactive. But then crucially, we created a short, accredited course called Frozen Planet that sold out. How does an online course sell out? It's because of our ratio between tutors and students. That sold out, 600 people signing up for Frozen Planet within 2 weeks. And our February intake, which has just started, sold out again, despite the fact that Frozen Planet hasn't been shown for 6 months in the UK. So you can see there, that was a conversion rate of 7%, by the way. But when you look at that movement between informal and formal, between for free and for fee, you've got a serious potential revenue stream. And that isn't the only motivation for doing this, but it is certainly one that a lot of people have spoken about.
Yeah.
Throw in a couple of thoughts, because I always like the analogies point, the blockbuster recorded music analogy, because simultaneously, what's happened with the recorded music and indeed the film industry is, yes, you've seen Blockbuster in difficulties, you see HMV in difficulties, but actually the audience for live music and for live cinema has never been greater. You cannot get into a cinema in London. And 20 years ago, when HMV was at its height, that was not the case. Cinema was said to be dying. Live music was said to be dying. Festivals absolutely everywhere. So it is not the case that people who go onto, who are getting things from the net are not interested in getting the same thing or a similar thing live. Quite often, they appear to be more interested, which is the second point, which is that most of the people I suspect that are going on to the MOOCs at the moment, and certainly seeing them through, and this is borne out by the stuff that Duke University put online, most of the people who complete that Duke University course on electrical biology, I think it was, are graduates. Well, of course, you'd expect them to be, wouldn't you? I mean, Duke University is a high-profile institution. It's putting on a high-profile academic course. And the people who got the motivation and the knowledge to get through to the end of it have already got some higher education. In other words, there isn't a substitution going on here. So I think that something that says no one's going to want to learn live, everyone's going to go online, is just wrong. Must be wrong. But Vade is absolutely right. There is a huge market here which is new. And that is of huge interest.
Okay, any more questions? I would actually just think back to maybe 10 years ago when the media, my industry, was thinking about these issues and thinking there'd be these huge new digital revenue streams that just haven't appeared. I mean, I know it's good to be optimistic and look forward to these things, but in a way the media has sort of cannibalized itself by really upping its online content, not really paying enough attention to the print side of things. But I think we've got time for one more question just over here.
Okay, I'm Anthony Butcher and I'm from Bangor Students' Union. We were talking a bit about HMV and its demise, and obviously Sir Michael Barber's report has just come out. So we're talking about opportunities and challenges of MOOCs, and I know future gazing is really risky. Where do you reckon maybe in 5-6 years is the best case scenario for MOOCs and for the higher education system in the UK, and the worst case scenario for MOOCs and the higher education system in the UK?
Good question. Stephen, you
I
can
think
start.
interesting question, and I would hesitate to predict the future in terms of developments in this area. I think it's already been said that the greatest opportunity, I think, is probably global rather than local, and we may see demand for UK higher education from overseas, which could be in part addressed by this form of provision. I don't see it in terms of replacing traditional universities in the UK. I don't think this is a threat to the traditional model of higher education in the UK.
What if, will employers be accepting these certificates though within 5 years? If someone can say that I can program or I can do this to a certain standard, do you need degrees? I mean, but let's say 2020, where are we then?
Well,
Not.
A certificate, any certificate, is worth whatever it's worth, isn't it? I mean, it's like a currency. It has the value that, that the recipient puts on it, and that is reflected by whatever experience they've had or expectations they have about what the certificate shows. Certainly, the degree is not, and never has been, the monopoly of all learning. It wasn't the case 20 years ago, it wasn't the case 200 years ago, and it won't be the case in 20 years' time. There were plenty of things where you would want to say, actually, I would put far more value on the fact you either worked for 3 years or have completed the following online courses, whether they're certificated or not. If I actually think you can do the Stanford robotics course at degree level, well, whether Stanford's given you a degree or not doesn't really matter. If you can actually do it, then I'll value it. The question will be, is that portable? Is like any currency, can you take it anywhere outside your own immediate circle? Can you take it internationally? And who stands behind it? And if you can find a way of someone, doesn't matter what organisation it is, saying, yes, this qualification is credible, doesn't matter how it's been awarded, doesn't matter what it's called, if it shows that someone can do something and someone, an employer or anyone else, wants that person and wants that skill, then it'll have a value, regardless of whether or not you call it a degree. Now, degrees are degrees because universities, and have got currency, because certainly in the UK, the universities have got credibility, the QAA has credibility, and therefore, on the whole, people believe that if you come out with a degree, it does mean something. That's still the case. Things can always change.
Anthony, it's a really, really great question. When you see us go live, and we're about to go through beta, but when you see us go live just after the summer, or the latter part of the summer, what you'll see, not only in addition to the partners that we've got on board so far, and the partners we'll see in the next few weeks, but you'll also have some element of employer presence in FutureLearn. So we're talking to some of the biggest employers in the world at the moment about what we might be able to do in partnership with them to ensure that the experience that students have is not only enriching to them in terms of a learning sense, but also provides them with potentially some transferable knowledge, some transferable skills potentially that will be of benefit to them in the modern workplace. And so we're trying to look at what that might look like to make sure that the environment and the experience on the platform is really incredibly rich. And we've already got those relationships with about 4 in 5 of all FTSE 100 companies today sponsoring staff on our OU courses. So that, I think, will be quite interesting to look at. Where's this headed? If you ask that question of anyone and they tell you where we're headed, you ask them to think again. Because if any of us said that we know where this is heading, we're talking nonsense. This is an incredibly immature market. This is a hugely disruptive phenomenon. And there are so many variables that it's simple. I mean, you can make presumptions and you can try and draw out some plans to a certain extent, but you cannot really predict with any great certainty where we are heading. One thing I would, however, suggest that you look at and you think about when we consider that question is that the financing of these initiatives is very, very different to our conventional universities that we've seen over recent decades and centuries. They're financed in very, very different ways. And Martin's right, we've never asked government for money and we're not going to ask government for money. And the reason for that is because we want to give our partners certainty over where we're headed. Now, one of the things that VC after VC told me when we were recruiting partners in the latter part of 2012 was that we've had this pitch from the Americans. But what makes it different from the OU? It's that we know where you've come from, and secondly, we know where you're headed. If you look at the financing of some of the MOOC platforms in the US, they're financed by venture capitalists and hedge funds who are going to want an exit in 5, 6, 7 years' time. And there will be huge pressure from those to go to IPO within the next few years. Now, that will put a real tension and stress on that market and where we head in this regard. And so it's not a criticism, but it's something to be mindful of in terms of where this is heading, because there are very different motivations at play in different parts of the world. But I think the potential is certainly positive. The opportunity, I think, is very, very exciting, but that's only if we do what I've been banging on about all afternoon and will continue to bang on about for the next few months, put students at the heart of it.
Okay, I think that's about time. Could you please thank the panel in the normal way? Thank you.